Do you wish to unleash the devastating and breathtaking might of some of the most destructive forces of nature onto your ill-prepared foes, raining down a maelstrom of carnage with bolts of lightning and fulgurous thunder? Yeah, well, there's a subclass for just that in D&D 5e. Let's take a look at the Storm Sorcerer. Hi there, I'm just a second level fighter who likes talking about Dungeons and Dragons, and if you feel your stress levels decreasing when listening to the sounds of a storm, then consider hitting the subscribe button. But enough about that, cause today we're chasing said storm. Yeah, this is an older subclass that was originally published in the often forbidden and forgotten Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, and then reprinted in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. It is also the only elemental-themed sorcerer subclass that stuck officially. No, the Draconic Sorcerer doesn't count. Anyhow, you very simply exhibit the raw power of air elementals and are therefore the storm that is approaching, harnessing the wind, lightning, and of course, thunder. I will just mention that due to its age, the Storm Sorcerer existed before additional spell lists for the class were ever a thing. As such, it does not at base give you access to some of the more thematic options that lie outside of the Sorcerer spell list. But I've made a quick homebrew one and shoved it at the end of the video if you're curious. I've also included a simple example build later on, but before we get there, let's dive into the subclass and what it has to offer. Starting out at 3rd level, when we finally unlock our first set of subclass features using the 2024 Player's Handbook, we get Wind Speaker. A very simple ribbon feature that allows us to speak, read, and write Primordial, the language of elemental beings. Unlike similar modern features, this doesn't offer an alternative if you already know Primordial, so keep that in mind. Then we get Tempestuous Magic, which kicks off the trend of storm-themed shenanigans. This feature allows you to use a bonus action directly before or after casting a spell of 1st level or higher to fly up to 10 feet. The spell itself doesn't need to be a sorcerer spell, and it also isn't restricted to having a casting time of 1 action. It obviously can't have a casting time of a bonus action, but you can use this feature in tandem with longer casting times if you like. The flight also doesn't provoke attacks of opportunity and doesn't cost you speed as it keys off of a specific action. However, the amount of movement cannot be increased or decreased by any means. But you can't use this feature while prone, and you probably can't use it while restrained. I say probably because it isn't quite so clear-cut. The prone condition limits your movement to crawling only, and flying is absolutely a form of movement, so that's out of the question entirely. But the restrained condition reduces your speed to 0, and as we established, this feature doesn't use your speed for the movement. Now, am I suggesting that this feature lets you escape the restrained condition like teleportation, rules as written? No, that would be silly. The rules interaction itself does suggest that though, and I don't like it. But what do you think? This is an older subclass with older language after all. Anyway, Tempestuous Magic can be used to reposition to safety or to a more favorable position that negates disadvantage on ranged attack rolls. And of course it can be used to get closer to enemies, which might actually be something you'd want to do. Moving on to level 6, we get another 2 features. Heart of the Storm gives us resistance to both lightning and thunder damage. Additionally, a 10-foot explosion of stormy magic erupts from our sorcerer whenever we start casting a spell of 1st level or higher that deals lightning or thunder damage. Once again, this doesn't have to be a sorcerer spell. The explosion itself deals your choice of lightning or thunder damage equal to half your level as a sorcerer to creatures of your choice within range. It's a fair amount of extra damage that you may want to position yourself more aggressively to achieve. Great for dealing with clustered hordes, but definitely not broken. I will just mention that if you take the ready action and choose to ready a spell that qualifies for this feature, then the feature itself is going to go off when you take the action, and not when you release the spell, as that would be when you start casting the spell. Then we get Storm Guide. This is a very thematic feature that allows for some creative interaction with the environment. You can cause rain in a 20-foot sphere around you to stop falling like a really big umbrella, or you can cause wind within a 100-foot sphere around you to blow in a direction of your choosing. The definition of rain here is important as your group's consensus may allow this feature to protect your party from something like acid rain. Just a thought. At 14th level we get Storm's Fury. This is a neat little feature we can use to punish those who dare strike us in combat. You use your action when hit with a melee attack to deal lightning damage to the attacker equal to your level as a sorcerer. This damage is unavoidable and has no save. Afterwards, the creature must then succeed on a strength save or be pushed up to 20 feet away in a straight line. This time we have a combination of evasive and explosive tactics that can keep you safe from further retaliation. The damage here is also reasonable and will stack up when combined with Heart of the Storm and general spellcasting, if running at your enemies tickles your fancy. Finally, at 18th level, we get our capstone Wind Soul. This might not seem too exciting as a few sorcerer subclasses can achieve flight through features, but let me assure you that this is the strongest version. You permanently gain a magical 60-foot fly speed. The magical part is specifically pointed out here, and I guess that means it can be taken away by something like an anti-magic ray or anti-magic field. But the best part is that you can use an action to half your fly speed to 30, and then share it with a group of nearby allies. An amount equal to 3 plus your charisma modifier to be precise, so probably 8 creatures at this point. This shared flight lasts for 1 hour, and you cannot use this feature again in this way until you finish a short or long rest. Wind Soul also gives you immunity to lightning and thunder damage, which is nice. All in all, a fairly decent capstone. Alright, so now that we've covered the features, what exactly does the Storm Sorcerer do? What is it good at and what is it trying to achieve? Well, I'll say it right now, it does not make you a better spellcaster. It doesn't add extra damage to any of your spells, and it doesn't interact with the sorcery point system at all, which is actually kinda cool as it lets you spam out meta magics without a care in the world, or just convert them into spell slots. What it does do though is make you a safer and more mobile spellcaster. It also weirdly rewards you for running at your enemies before casting spells, but you absolutely don't need to do that. Damage from Heart of the Storm shouldn't come at the cost of your character's life. Once again, it also doesn't have additional spells like some of the newest subclasses. I will say that the Storm Sorcerer is very thematic, and with some reasonable spell choices, it fits its overall concept both mechanically and roleplay wise. Here's a few general sorcerer things to keep in mind when making a Storm Sorcerer. You are a charisma-based spellcaster, so pump it up. But you also get access to constitution saves, which is very rare for a spellcaster by default, and you will make the wizards and clerics jealous. Your hit die is a d6, which is very bad. However, pumping constitution can solve that problem along with a few other choices we'll discuss later. Sorcerers do have a limited spell selection, and they can't change their prepared spells on a long rest like some other spellcasters, so choose your spells carefully. As mentioned, you also don't get extra spells from your subclass. No, I'm not actually salty about this. You will just feel kinda limited and inferior in that regard if you stand next to a subclass that does give extra spells, so prepare yourself. That being said, sorcerers have some of the most devastating spell save DCs. Their innate sorcery feature, or Mage Rage as I like to call it, increases their DC by 1. They can also use a certain meta magic option to give their target disadvantage on saving throws, so resisting their spells is an uphill battle. Speaking of meta magic, this group of features can be used in tandem with spellcasting to produce some potent effects, from re-rolling damage to doubling duration to changing the casting time of a spell to a bonus action. There is one option in particular that can be used by a Storm Sorcerer to change the damage type of a spell to another damage type, that being Transmuted Spell. This means that any spell that deals acid, cold, fire, or poison can be changed into a storm spell that deals lightning or thunder, which, while it won't necessarily make the spell any better, it will keep in line with the theme and allow it to activate Heart of the Storm, which is nice. Well, considering spells are basically your bread and butter as a sorcerer, what should you consider taking? Now, I'm not going to dictate what's the best and what is an auto-include. Hell, I'm not even going to tell you what is good this time. No, this time we're specifically looking at storm-themed spells from across the sorcerer spell list. As always, take whatever speaks to you and your character concept. But today we're looking at suggestions that might include lightning or thunder damage, obviously, as well as cold damage because snowstorms are a thing too. We'll also look at some storm-adjacent spells that might lean into the wind aspect a bit more. It goes without saying that if you can reflavor a spell to better fit in with the theme without changing any of the mechanics, then do that. I haven't necessarily taken it into account fully here, but you can just pop Transmute spell onto the more prolific fire, acid, and poison spells to turn them into storm spells too. Lightning Ball is way better than Lightning Bolt, by the way. Of course, do not only use these suggestions I'm about to throw out. You won't have a very well-rounded sorcerer if you do. Anyhow, here's the list. Anything in blue has been taken from an older book like Xanathar's Guide to Everything, if you're like me and still like looking at older content from time to time. The rest are straight out of the 2024 Player's Handbook. I won't go through them all, but for first level I can't recommend Fog Cloud enough. It's awesome for a speedy getaway or ambush. You can reflavor Featherfall so it is spirals of air slowing the fall of you and your allies too. Obviously, you're going to need some damaging spells at some point, and Chromatic Orb and Witch Bolt are legitimately the best attack roll spells available to you that deal lightning damage without using Transmute spell. Rhyme's Binding Ice is straight up better than Shatter because it can trap the targets for a turn or two and deals the same amount of damage with the same type of save. It can be found in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. Then Lightning Bolt is obviously the scary third level choice and will deal a ton of damage if you can get the angle just right. Storm Sphere is one of my favorites from Xanathar's Guide, and it has a pretty big area of effect with some tar pit potential and attack rolls too. Chain Lightning is the pinnacle of lightning damage based spells when we finally get access to 6 level spell slots. It does very respectable damage, but at that point you may want to use your big spell slots on lasting forms of damage or crowd control. Then just reflavor Reverse Gravity to a really strong updraft and it fits in perfectly. Whirlwind is another Xanathar spell that is one of the biggest and most savage tar pits in the game. It can suck in creatures and restrain them as they rise up in the air. If they do make a save and end up escaping, they get flung out of the effect, but at the same level so they take some falling damage. It's pretty mean. Level 8 was a bit of a challenge to find a storm-related spell, so I opted for Incendiary Cloud and using Transmute spell on it for a very deadly electrical storm. Finally, choosing Wish at 9th level and using it to cast the 8th level Druid spell Control Weather seems like a decent endpoint, at least from a role-playing perspective. You could always just take Meteor Swarm and change the fire damage to lightning or thunder damage if you wanted to. Once again, do not feel trapped by taking only storm-flavored spells. At the end of the day, you are still a sorcerer after all. Now let's take a look at a few feats you might consider when making a Storm Sorcerer. Elemental Adept allows you to ignore resistance for a specific elemental damage type with spells, as well as treating any 1s rolled as 2s. It can also be taken multiple times to apply to different damage types. You can use this feat to slightly increase the chances of chromatic or bouncing to secondary targets, by the way. Lightly Armored is an interesting choice as it gives you training with light armor and shields. Now, even the best non-magical light armor is worse than mage armor, but equipping a shield for an extra 2 AC is pretty awesome. My favorite option is taking the telekinetic feat and reflavoring it so that you're manipulating objects and creatures with specifically targeted gusts of wind. See how they like you with your wind hand and penchant for blowing people off of cliff edges. Finally, I get to mention another option for resilient that isn't constitution. You already have proficiency with those saves, so dexterity is the next best option. Statistically speaking, if we're looking at oversaturation of specific saving throws. If you are looking to boost your armor class, then this is a decent one. For origin feats, Tough counteracts your small hit die. Alert lets you swap places with someone with better initiative than you so you can strike like a lightning bolt, possibly opening up combat with a lightning bolt. And of course, Magic Initiate gives you access to more spells. You can also use your own spell slots to cast the first level spell you get with this feat, which is pretty cool. As for species, you can take whatever fits your character concept here. Anything can make an effective sorcerer. I am gonna ignore the Air Genasi as the thematic option cause their resistances are kinda wasted and it's a bit cheesy. But for my suggestions, taking the custom lineage from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything can be decent if you then pick up the Metamagic Adept feat from the same book. I didn't mention this in the feat section cause Storm Sorcerers are not too sorcery point heavy and it doesn't increase your ability scores at all. But as a free option at level 1, I'll take 2 extra sorcery points and 2 extra Metamagic options, thank you very much. You can even take the Air Genasi as a cosmetic base here and make a version that doesn't clash with your subclass features. My other suggestion here is Dwarf. They get extra hit points, which is literally the only reason they're here. They also happen to have the big version of Dark Vision, resistance to poison, and the feature that never sees the light of day, Stone Cunning. Yeah, dwarves are somewhat of a remedy to having a d6 hit die. They're also conceptually pleasing to me. If you're looking to spice up your leveling journey with some multiclassing, then I've got 3 suggestions that might interest you. Taking a 1-level dip into Warlock will forever come up when discussing multiclassing and sorcerers. Yes, Warlocks can still spam out Eldritch Blast using Quicken Spell. The damage is definitely reliable and it is indeed an option. The Genie and Fathomless Patrons fit in nicely with the Storm theme here if you want to commit another 2 levels. Then combining Rogue and Sorcerer works weirdly well. Rogues only make a single attack and the True Strike cantrip is available to sorcerers, allowing you to use Charisma for your attack and damage rolls with a weapon. Rogues also get a bunch of extra goodies to flesh out their kit, and you can really balance out the levels here if you want to make a hybrid caster that sneak attacks. I will mention Swashbuckler as the subclass that fits best with the Storm theme, at least in my opinion, but that one's debatable. Finally, we have the most thematic combination that allows for a very specific mechanic, the Tempest Domain Cleric. Yes, this thing still exists even though it lives in the old PHB. It wasn't updated or replaced in the current player's handbook, and that makes it fair game in my eyes. Tempest Clerics get a very specific channel divinity that lets them simply deal maximum damage with a lightning or thunder damage spell, which is juiced. It also does not have to be a cleric spell, which is why this is here. They also worship the literal gods of storms, which is the ultimate role-playing tie-in. On top of that, clerics have a lot of low-level spells that don't necessarily require a high wisdom score, and dipping a few levels here will net you full spell slot progression. Yeah, this is a multi-class combination made in heaven. During a storm, of course. Alrighty, the time has come to build us a Storm Sorcerer. This is just my take on it, and it isn't hyper-optimized for damage or anything like that. Most of that comes down to spell selection anyway, which I won't be covering here. I will say that the goal here is to boost our hit points as high as possible so we can run in and make full use of our Heart of the Storm. Is that an even remotely advisable strategy? No, not really, but it sounds like fun. Anyway, we're choosing Dwarf as our species for the extra hit point per level and the spiffy beard. Using the standard array, our starting ability scores will be 15 Charisma, 14 Constitution, and 13 Dexterity. The rest don't matter whatsoever, distribute them how you see fit. But this base sets us up to pump our spellcasting stat and our health boosting stat. Then for our background, we're going custom, choosing to boost our Charisma by 2 and Dexterity by 1. This will give us a reasonable armor class with Mage Armor, at least for the first few levels. But a little spoiler, that armor class will never improve. Of course, we're taking Tough for another 2 extra hit points per level. For skills, take whatever keeps the wind howling. The general play pattern here is to cast storm-flavored spells and be a chunky dwarf. Really dumb, really simple. Moving on in levels, we'll pick up Telekinetic at 4th level and raise our Charisma score to 18. This will let us shove people around with reflavored gusts of wind, as well as give us access to Wind Hand. At 8th level, we'll take an ability score improvement to cap our Charisma out at 20. With that out of the way, we'll just take another 2 ASIs and pump up Constitution with our 2 remaining general feats at 12th and 16th level. At this point, we'll have 18 Constitution and a mighty +4 hit points per level from that. For our epic boon, we're obviously taking the boon of Fortitude for the flat 40 hit points and the additional healing. We'll be increasing our Charisma score here by 1, not that it matters until we actually get another epic boon, which is DM dependent. I will just mention that with all of these choices, our Dwarven Storm Sorcerer will sit with a mighty 262 hit points total at 20th level if we choose to take the flat number at every single level up instead of rolling, which is acceptably juicy if you ask me. Yes, our AC is still a pitiful 15 and we will still get hit by most attacks, but we'll let the hit points worry about that until it's an actual problem. We could have sacrificed some hit points to get higher AC and a shield with lightly armored, but I like this better. Lastly, this is a bit unusual, but I'm going to share a quick homebrew spell list I made for the Storm Sorcerer. I just want to make this very clear. This is not actually a part of the base subclass, and I'm only doing this because I think it's interesting to theorize what one such list may look like for this subclass, while keeping it in line with the 3 subclasses in the 2024 PHB that have their own additional spell lists, and also only using spells from the PHB. I don't actually expect anyone to use this list of additional spells for their Storm Sorcerer. Personally, I'd be okay playing the Storm Sorcerer without them, by the way. But if you think the subclass needs it, approach your DM, propose a list, and see what they say. But yeah, the list itself has some essential additions like Fog Cloud and Shatter. I chose Silence as a stand-in for an Eye of the Storm where things get weirdly quiet. Not sure if it fits too well, but I thought it was interesting. Cold Lightning from the Druid spell list was preferable to Lightning Bolt as it felt more storm-like and cinematic. It also lasts 10 minutes and can cause way more destruction over a period of time. For Summon Elemental, the idea is to have a restriction that you can only summon the air version, kind of like with the Genie Warlock in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Always nice to have a summonable buddy on a sorcerer too. Then, both spells this list offers at 9th level deal thunder damage and radiant damage. However, at this point, the options for spells that actually fit in with the storm theme are incredibly limited, so Holy Storms and Thunderous Explosions will have to do. Picking out spells for this type of spell list is actually a bit more involved than one might think at first, and for someone who suffers from analysis paralysis like myself, it was difficult at the low levels where there were a lot of spells that fit the mold perfectly. But yeah, it's just a fun, useless exercise. Alright, that was the Storm Sorcerer. An oldie, but most definitely a goldie. It lacks a bit of punch in the conventional sense, but I think it more than makes up for it in pure flavor. Anyway, if you've made it this far into the video, then you're a legend and I really appreciate you. What do you think about this subclass? And if you could choose one of the other 3 elements to be adapted into a sorcerer subclass, which one would it be? Earth, water, or fire? But yeah, that'll do it for this one. Cheers.